Hi, hello, good morning. Yes, good morning, good afternoon. Ano pa, good night, good midnight. Ayan, para sa mga nagpupuyat dyan na manood ng aking mga video. So, thank you so much for the effort and of course for allotting some of your time to watch my videos. Okay, so don't worry because the videos that I will be giving today, next week ko pa po yan ipapaquiz so that you will have ample time to watch the videos and at the same time to review for your, okay, for your quiz next Thursday. So Thursday pa po ang scheduled quiz natin, particularly in the lecture. All right. So for this video class or classes, I will be discussing about impregnation and embedding. Okay. So why do we have to discuss it at the same time? This is because, okay, we make use of the same reagent for your impregnation and embedding. So parehas lang na reagent ang ginagamit natin. So in short, when we say impregnating or infiltrating medium, it's the same as your embedding medium. Okay? So we can actually make use of these two terms interchangeably. So, kunwari, when we say paraffin wax, it is both an impregnating medium and an embedding medium at the same time. So, parehas lang dapat, okay, in most cases, parehas lang po dapat ang ginagamit natin na medium. So, we make use of the same medium for both your impregnation and embedding. Okay, so when we say impregnation, again, this is otherwise referred to as your infiltration. Okay, and what is this process? So this involves completely removing your clearing agent from the tissue and replacing it with a medium in order for us to completely fill the different tissue cavities. Okay, so the different spaces which are present in between your cells, okay, in between the components which are present in your extracellular matrix. So that is impregnation or infiltration. Okay, and again, I would just like to emphasize that your medium, it has to be compatible with the clearing agent. Okay, otherwise your clearing agent will not be removed and it will not be replaced by your infiltrating or embedding medium. Okay, so on the other hand, when we say embedding, other terms that we use to refer to this step in tissue processing are, we have casting or blocking. Okay, so after the process of impregnation, you have to perform embedding. So this is a process wherein your impregnated or infiltrated tissue is placed precisely in a mold with a medium. Okay, so the placement or the placing rather of your impregnated or infiltrated tissue in your mold in a sorry, in a particular arrangement. This is referred to as your orientation. Okay, so proper orientation of the impregnated tissue is very important in embedding. Okay, so dito it will, sorry Miss Sam, okay, it will determine whether we are able to produce a cross section, okay, whether we are able to produce a longitudinal section of your tissue sample. So it all depends upon the proper orientation of your impregnated tissue sample during embedding. Okay. Ayan. So what are the purposes of impregnation? So when we say impregnation, we perform these procedures for several purposes. Number one, just like what is mentioned in its definition. So number one, one purpose is to remove the clearing agent. Okay? Another purpose based on the definition of your impregnation is that you have to fill the cavities, the spaces, and the interstices which are present in your tissue sample. Okay? And another important purpose of impregnation is to render firm consistency to your tissue sample. So if a particular tissue sample has a firm consistency, so we would be able to make thin slices or sections from your block. Okay? So actually you can have a little bit of an experiment at home. Okay, so if you are going to compare, okay, compare cutting a tomato perhaps versus cutting a carrot. Okay, so kung i-compare mo, in which or in what vegetable are you able to cut thin slices? So it's easier to cut thin slices of your carrots as compared to your tomatoes. That is because your carrot has a firmer consistency as compared to your tomato. Okay? And this is basically the purpose of impregnation. So it allows us to cut, cut, and handle our tissue samples easily, especially during sectioning. Okay, so another um, additional purpose of impregnation, particularly if you are using paraffin wax as your medium, is that it will allow us to store processed tissue samples for a long period of time. Okay? Yes. And syempre, if you are able to embed your tissue sample, again, it will also allow us to store, okay, your processed tissue sample for a longer period of time. All right? So those are the different purposes as well as the definitions of impregnation and embedding. Okay? So what are the different media that we can use for infiltration and embedding. Okay? So again, just like what I have mentioned a while back, pag sinabi natin, when we say infiltrating media, so it is the same as embedding media. Okay? So the four general types of embedding media, we have your paraffin, your celloidine, otherwise referred to as your collodion, your gelatin, and your plastic. Okay? Ayan. The main purpose of your media is to infiltrate, to support, and to enclose your tissue specimen. Okay? So therefore, in order for us to facilitate cutting later on, the medium in your embedding and in your impregnation should be the same in order for us to achieve the same consistency of your tissue and your block. Okay? 'Di ba? Imagine mo, imagine, okay, Miss Naide, okay, imagine you are cutting something in which magkaiba yung consistency. Okay, like for example, if you prepare gelatin with pineapples or with cocktail, yung fruit cocktail, 'di ba? Oh, I'm sure all of us have eaten gelatin with fruit cocktail. Okay? So, if you are going to look at the consistency of your pineapples versus your gelatin, they are different, right? And so, it's hard for you to cut them simultaneously when you eat. Okay? 'Di ba? Parang pag ika-cut mo sila, medyo mahirap siya. Okay? Syempre, it's easier for you to cut the gelatin because it has it has a softer consistency as compared to your pineapple. Okay? And the tendency is you will not be able to cut the pineapple. Tama nga. Okay, this is because they have a different consistency. Your gelatin has a different consistency with the fruit cocktails which are present in there. But in the processes of infiltration and embedding, you have to create an almost equal or an almost the same consistency of your tissue and your block. Alright? Ayan. So, dapat parehas po ng consistency. So that later on, when you do your sectioning, you would be able to produce sections easily. Okay? So, yan po. Alright. So, the most important characteristic of your embedding media or your media is that it should be capable of being converted readily from liquid to solid form. Okay, yes. So why do we need the liquid form of your media? So the liquid form of your media allows us to perform infiltration. Okay, so of course, in order for it to penetrate your tissue sample, it has to be in its liquid form. Pwede ba naman? Can a solid media or medium infiltrate your tissue sample? Of course not. Okay, so that's why in the process of infiltration, you need the liquid form of your medium. Okay, and of course, after the process of infiltration, your media, it is the one that you use for embedding. And the solid form of your media is important during the embedding process. Otherwise, you will not be able to come up with your blocks. You will not be able to enclose your infiltrated tissue sample. So the liquid form is important for infiltration. The solid form of your medium is important for the embedding process. Okay, so that's why it has to be convertible from liquid to solid. Okay, so depending upon the media that we are using for infiltration and embedding, there are several mechanisms of solidification involved. Okay, so the first mechanism of solidification is referred to as crystallization. So crystallization is observed, or this is the mechanism of solidification of your paraffin and your carbowax media. Okay, so another mechanism is the evaporation of your solvent, which is seen in your celloidine or your collodion. And lastly, we have polymerization, which is the mechanism involved in the solidification of your plastics. Okay, yan. So those are the different mechanisms involved in the solidification of your media. Okay, so we will be discussing each media. So the first one that we will be discussing about would be your paraffin. Okay, yan. So first, let us consider your paraffin waxes. Okay, so paraffin impregnation, or your paraffin wax rather, it is considered to be the best medium for routine processing. Okay, it is otherwise known as the simplest and the most commonly used media or medium for impregnation and embedding. Okay, one thing that you have to remember for your paraffin wax, yung the most important characteristic of your paraffin wax that we have to consider is the melting point. Okay, yes. So we have the melting point of your wax. All right. And the general rule when it comes to the melting point of your waxes is that the higher, ang general rule po natin, the higher the melting point, okay, the harder the wax. Yan. So the higher the melting point, the harder the wax. And actually, when it comes to infiltration and embedding, in conjunction with its relationship with your sectioning later on, we want a hard wax. Why? Because the harder the wax or the harder the media, the thinner the sections. that you are able to produce during microtomy or sectioning. Okay, so the higher the melting point, the harder the wax, the thinner. Okay, the thinner the sections. Yes. Is it important that your sections are thin? Yes, in general, this is what we want. Okay, so in general, ang gusto natin ay thinner sections because this will allow microscopy, or yes, this will allow the examination of your tissue sections better in during microscopy. Okay, so yan. So another consideration for your paraffin impregnation, this actually serves as a disadvantage if you are not careful about it. Okay, so take note that your paraffin wax, it shrinks about 10% on cooling. Okay, so that's why if you are going to consider your block, for example, okay, so say for example, we have here your paraffin block, okay? So even if you are going to fill it with your paraffin, so even if you are going to fill it with your paraffin up to the topmost portion of your block, okay, so say for example, we have here your block and you are going to fill it with your paraffin wax during embedding, your mold rather, and you're going to fill it with paraffin wax during embedding. Okay, so magiging ganyan. Initially, the appearance of your block will be like this. Okay, however, upon cooling, you would be able to notice a depression present at the, sorry, hindi na siya pantay, weight. Okay? Yan. So you would be able to observe, okay, a depression present at the center of your block. Okay? So this is because, again, your paraffin wax, okay, one of its characteristics is that it shrinks about 10% on cooling. Okay, so yan. So that is the appearance. And so the appearance of your block actually after cooling will be like this. Yan, ganyan yung itsura niya. So you are going to you will be able to observe rather the depression that is present, okay, at the center of your block. Okay, and this depression, this is the one that we usually trim. So tinatanggal po natin usually yan, okay, in order for us to make a cube or make a block. Yan, so this will become part of your trimmings, of your paraffin wax trimmings. Okay, yan. All right. In the laboratory, okay, in the laboratory, the most commonly used wax, okay, the most commonly used waxes has or have a melting point of 45, 52, 56, and 58. Okay, so I repeat, common waxes available in the laboratory have melting points of 45, 52, 56, and 58 degrees Celsius. Okay? So out of this most common waxes in the laboratory, the most common among the common waxes is your 56. Okay? Is your 56 degrees Celsius. Okay, so that is how we identify your paraffin waxes. We identify them based on their melting points. Okay, at ang pinaka-common na ay C56 degrees Celsius. Right? Alright. So the paraffin wax that is to be utilized is dependent upon several factors. So we have to consider several factors in choosing the right or the appropriate paraffin wax to be used in the laboratory. Okay? So one of the considerations that we have to make is your laboratory temperature. Okay? Yan. So laboratory temperature of the temperature rather of your laboratory. Okay? So if the laboratory temperature is 20 to 24 degrees Celsius, the wax that you have to make use should have a melting point of 54 to 58 degrees Celsius. Okay, so I repeat, if the laboratory temperature is 20 to 24 degrees Celsius, then the melting point of the waxes, which you can use, would range from 54 to 58 degrees Celsius. Okay, so in contrast, if the laboratory temperature is between 15 to 18, okay, so if it is 15 to 18 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the melting point of the wax should be 50 to 54 degrees Celsius. Okay, so I repeat, if the laboratory temperature is 15 to 18 degrees Celsius, then you should use a paraffin wax with a temperature between 50 to 54 degrees Celsius. Okay, ayan. Another another consideration that you have to make, wala siya dito sa ating PowerPoint. So dito ko na lang ilalagay ha, sa gilid. Wait lang po. Okay, yan. Alright. Yan. So another consideration is, of course, the hardness of your tissue sample. Okay? So, in general, our rule when it comes to impregnation and embedding is that, okay, the harder the tissue, the higher the melting point dapat. Okay, so that means hard tissues require, wax, or yes, require uh, the use of a wax with higher, okay, with higher melting point. Okay, yes. So in short, yes, if you are going to make use of your, or if you are handling rather hard tissues, then the melting point of your wax should be higher. Okay, yes, because what are we trying to achieve? We are trying to achieve the same consistency of your tissue and your block. So the tendency is, if you make use of waxes with a low melting point, so your tissue sample might be harder, okay, as compared to the block itself. And we don't want that to happen. Okay, remember, isa sa mga purposes niya is for your block and your tissue sample to have the same consistency. So that's why we should make use of waxes with higher melting points. Okay, with higher melting points. Okay, and in relation to sectioning, okay, in relation to sectioning, the harder the paraffin, or hard paraffin, sige, hard paraffin, okay, requires the use of heavy duty microtomes. Okay, so I repeat, hard paraffin requires the use of heavy duty microtomes. Okay, so examples of heavy duty microtomes that we have in the laboratory are your sliding microtomes. Okay, ayan. Yes. So another factor that we have to consider would, of course, be the temperature at which we carry out the process of impregnation. Okay, so in general, the required temperature during impregnation should be, or is, 2 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than the melting point of the wax. Okay, so I repeat, for paraffin impregnation, the required temperature is 2 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than the melting point of the wax. Okay, so just like what I have discussed in our laboratory, in our post-laboratory lecture, okay? So if we are going to apply this rule, so say for example, the melting point of your wax is 56 degrees Celsius. Okay? So at what temperature range should you carry out the process of paraffin impregnation? So again, we have, you just add, okay, the required temperature. So we have 58, it should be 58 to 61 degrees Celsius. Okay? Ayan. So if, for example naman, you are making use of a paraffin wax with a melting point of, okay, with a melting point of 54 degrees, okay, 54 degrees Celsius, then the temperature at which you should carry out your impregnation is, we have 56, okay, to 56 to 59 degrees Celsius. Okay? Yan. So again, there is a note, kumbaga, dito. Parang NB, ganon. May nakalagay na NB dyan. Why? Because, okay. Why? Because, take note that a temperature that is beyond 60 degrees Celsius is already deleterious or damaging to your tissue sample. Okay, yes, because this temperature higher than 60 degrees Celsius, it is considered to be too hot already. Okay, it is considered to be too hot for your tissue sample. Okay, and so apart from this recommendation or this requirement as for the temperature during impregnation, we also consider, okay, we also consider 55 to 60 degrees Celsius, depending upon, of course, the paraffin wax that you are going to use. Okay, ayan. So in short, in the exam or in the quiz, you look for two values for the temperature requirements. So it could be 2 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than the melting point of the wax, or 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Okay, so if it is a general question, which one is a better answer? A better answer would be 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Because this temperature range, okay, considered the fact that beyond 60 degrees Celsius is already deleterious or damaging to your tissue sample. Okay, so say for example, both choices are given. So a better answer would be 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Okay, so say for example, yung tanong, the question is just a general question like, paraffin impregnation should be carried out at what temperature? Okay, so A, 2 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than the melting point. B, 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. C, um, uh, 10 degrees Celsius higher than the melting point. D, 65 degrees Celsius. Okay, so the best answer for that one would be 55 to 60 degrees Celsius. Okay, yun po ang best answer. Nakuha. Ma'am, what if there was a given, or yes, there's a given melting point for the wax? You follow this rule. Okay, so if a melting point was given, okay, if the melting point of the wax was given, you follow this rule. Okay, however, again, it should not exceed 60. Okay, you follow this rule, but the values that you or the temperature that is required should not exceed 60 degrees Celsius. Okay? So, ganun po siya. Alright? So, ayan. So, say for example, pag dito sa 54 degrees Celsius, so of course, the best answer would be this one, 56 to 59 degrees Celsius. But if the melting point of the wax is 56 degrees Celsius, remember, we cannot use 61 because it's already above 60. Okay? And so, for this one, you should adjust it to 58 to 60 degrees Celsius. So, it's a case-to-case basis. As long as it does not, okay, as long as it does not or it should not exceed 60 degrees Celsius. Okay? So another factor or consideration would be the number of changes that you have to use during the paraffin impregnation. Okay, so in general, for paraffin impregnation, the minimum required number of changes would be 2. Okay, so it should be at least 2 changes. Okay, so at least 2 changes. Erase ko lang po ha. I'll just erase it. Right. So other factors which will affect paraffin wax impregnation would include, okay, the nature and size of your tissue sample. Okay, the nature and the size of your tissue sample. So for larger and denser tissue samples, so they require longer and more frequent changes. Okay, so for larger and denser tissue samples, so this would require longer and more frequent changes. Okay, so another factor which will also affect paraffin wax impregnation is, of course, the clearing agent that was used. So this one, I already explained it when in the previous video on clearing. So remember, certain clearing agents are easier to replace or to be replaced by the paraffin. And some clearing agents are harder to be replaced or are more difficult to be replaced by your paraffin wax. Okay? So if we compare xylene or benzene versus your chloroform and cedarwood oil, your xylene and your benzene, they are easier to remove and to be replaced as compared to your chloroform and your cedarwood oil, which are more difficult to remove and to be replaced. Okay? And so, how would they affect your impregnation process? If you make use of xylene and benzene, the impregnation process will be shorter. Okay? And if you make use of chloroform or cedarwood oil, the paraffin impregnation process will be longer. Okay, yeah, so that's or those are the different factors and considerations with regards to paraffin wax impregnation. Okay, so what are the advantages of your paraffin wax? Number one, okay, number one, since your paraffin wax is harder as compared to the other embedding media that we can use in histopath, you are able to produce thin sections. Okay, thin serial sections are produced with the use of your paraffin. Okay, so in particular, we have sections with a thickness of 4 to 6 micrometers. Right, so this is the reason why your paraffin wax is utilized for routine processing because 4 to 6 micrometers, this is the required, okay, this is the required thickness of your sections for histologic study, okay, for histologic or histopathologic study. Okay, so histologic and histopathologic study. Right, so that is the required thickness. Yan. So that means your paraffin wax is able to meet this criteria or criterion or the thickness of your sections, okay, for histologic and histopathologic study. So that's why they are used for routine processing. Okay, so apart from that, another advantage of your paraffin wax is that it is considered to be rapid. So the entire processing, if you are going to make use of your paraffin wax for infiltration and embedding, is already considered to be rapid. Okay, so how rapid is rapid in histopath? So rapid in the sense that sections are prepared. Okay, sections are prepared within 24 hours. Okay, so I repeat, sections are prepared within 24 hours. I know that, of course, in comparison with the turnaround time in other sections of the laboratory, 24 hours is already too long, right? But we're talking about histopath here. So it's your tissue processing is not a simple procedure, or it's not as simple and as short as the other procedures that you perform in other sections. So you start with fixation, right? And then you end up with your slides, your tissue slides that are of diagnostic quality. Okay? So meaning yung 24 hours na yan, the 24 hours that is there, it includes the entire tissue processing. So from fixation until such time that you have your sections or your tissue slides, okay, that are of diagnostic quality, ready for the examination by the pathologist. Okay, so from fixation until mounting or cover sleeping na yan, 24 hours. Okay, and that is rapid already as compared to the other types of media that we use in the laboratory. Okay, ayan. So another advantage of your paraffin wax is that it is compatible with many staining techniques. So that means you would have a lot of choices when it comes to the staining procedure that you may use, okay, in conjunction with paraffin processing. So it permits many staining procedures. Okay, which is also important because remember that the type of staining procedure that you're going to use later on depends on the type of constituent or tissue component that the pathologist would like to see under the microscope. Okay, so this serves as an advantage for your paraffin wax because it is compatible with many staining techniques. Okay, and again, just like what I have mentioned in the purposes, okay, another additional advantage for your paraffin wax is that it permits, it permits storage. Okay, so you can store your paraffin blocks or your paraffin wax infiltrated tissues for a longer period of time. Okay, so yan. So those are the advantages of your paraffin wax. Okay, so now let us consider what are the disadvantages of your paraffin wax. Okay, disadvantages um, disadvantages of the use of your paraffin wax include the following. Okay, so prolonged immersion of your tissue sample in paraffin wax. So this will cause excessive shrinkage and hardening. Okay, remember in our post lab I mentioned that even if we do not consider prolonged immersion. Okay, one of the consequences really of exposing or immersing your samples in your melted paraffin would be it will become hard and drunken. Talagang consequence niya yon. Okay? And this is worsened if you are going to immerse your tissue sample for prolonged periods of time in your melted paraffin. So that's why the keyword here is excessive. Okay? Excessive shrinkage and hardening. Nakuha? Kasi kahit na hindi siya prolonged. Okay? So Miss Sem, again, if you do not understand my Tagalog, you can ask via our group chat. Alright. Kahit na hindi siya prolonged in English, even if it is not prolonged, it will already cause shrinkage and hardening. Okay, as a consequence. Ako, how much more if you are going to immerse it for prolonged periods of time? So the shrinkage and hardening of your tissue sample will now become excessive. Okay, it will now become excessive. Right? Another problem with your paraffin wax is if you are going to make use of overheated paraffin. Okay, so if you are going to make use of overheated paraffin, okay, this will also worsen the brittleness that is brought about by your by the process of infiltration, brittleness of tissue. Okay, so if you are going to make use of overheated paraffin, this will worsen the brittleness, okay, that is caused by infiltration or impregnation. All right. Remember, if you can still remember, if you can still remember, I mentioned this in the post-laboratory discussion of activity 1. Okay? 'Di ba, what do we do if after melting your paraffin wax? Okay? So especially if you are using your hot plate, 'di ba, to melt your paraffin wax, so we can use higher temperatures. However, you have to adjust the temperature of your melted paraffin wax so that, okay, it will follow the required temperature for your impregnation. So if you make use naman of your paraffin oven in melting your paraffin wax, you just set it at the required temperature, okay, and no need to adjust. So this is the reason why if you are using hot plate, you have to adjust, okay, the temperature of your melted paraffin, so that the use of overheated paraffin, the brittleness of your tissue sample will not be worsened. Okay? Ayan. All right. So another problem which might arise during the infiltration process would be your inadequate infiltration. Okay? So we have inadequate infiltration. So when we say inadequate infiltration, so this will result to soft and shrunken. Okay, soft and shrunken. Shrunken in the sense that it is not, it doesn't have a firm consistency. Okay, so shrunken in the sense that it does not have a firm consistency. So kunwari, bilog siya dapat. Okay, so kunwari, it's supposed to be circular. Your tissue is supposed to be circular. If there is inadequate infiltration, the circular nature of your tissue sample might not be observed. Okay? So meaning, pwedeng ano siya, yung ano bang tawag sa Filipino nito or Tagalog? Pwede siyang lupaypay. What's lupaypay in English? Okay. Basta it will not have a circular, kumbaga. Okay? It will not have a circular appearance. Okay? So that's shrunken. Okay? Shrunken. In this case, kasi the shrinkage that is caused by prolonged immersion, the entire tissue sample will really shrink. Okay, liliit talaga siya in size. But in adequate infiltration, in Tagalog, it is lupaypay. Okay, saglit nga, tingnan ko nga kung ano ang English. Ay. Okay, hindi ko mahanap yung lupaypay. Okay, basta ganun yung ano. I will try to look for a better term later and then send it in your group chats. Okay? So anyway, yes. It's shrunken, para siyang drooping. It's drooping, something like that. The appearance would be like that. Okay? So that is one disadvantage of inadequate infiltration using your paraffin wax. All right. So what is the matter? What is the matter with you? Okay, what is the matter? Or what makes your tissue sample soft and shrunken if there is inadequate infiltration? Okay. Remember, one of the purposes of infiltration is to completely remove your clearing agent, so that the paraffin, which is supposed to penetrate, okay, which is supposed to penetrate and fill the different cavities, the different spaces in your tissue sample, di ba? It ano yung sinabi ko kanina? Okay, yung clearing agent, the clearing agent should be removed completely. Okay? so that the paraffin wax that will enter the interstices or the spaces in your tissue sample will harden. Okay? Remember, during the process of infiltration, okay, so what do you want your wax to do? Your wax, it should infiltrate. Okay? And after infiltration, it should harden inside the spaces of your tissue sample so that the normal morphology of your tissue sample will be observable under the microscope. Okay? Yes. We want it to become solid inside your tissue sample. Okay? Yan. But in the case of inadequate infiltration, the clearing agent which are supposed to be or which is supposed to be removed from your tissue sample are still there or it's still there. Okay? So you were not able to completely remove the clearing agent. And what will happen if you are not able to completely remove the clearing agent? This will dissolve the paraffin wax which is supposed to solidify. Okay, so that means your paraffin wax is not able to solidify to its maximum capacity. Okay, because the clearing agent is there. Remember, one characteristic of your clearing agent should be uh, should be its compatibility with your paraffin wax. Your clearing agent has to be compatible with your paraffin wax. And when it comes to compatibility, we are talking about the solubility of your reagents. Okay? So that means yung paraffin wax or yung clearing agent na hindi mo natanggal, the clearing agent that remains in your tissue sample will dissolve. Okay? Will dissolve the paraffin wax which is supposed to solidify. Okay? Which is supposed to solidify. So that's why in inadequate infiltration, your tissue samples become soft and shrunken. Okay, become soft and shrunken. And in addition to this, how would you know that infiltration was performed inadequately apart from having soft and shrunken tissues? Apart from having soft and shrunken tissues. Okay, so inadequate infiltration, this may also be observed when your tissue blocks in particular undergo crumbling. Okay? Crumbling of tissue blocks during sectioning. Ayan. So, crumbling of tissue blocks during sectioning. Okay? So, this also indicates inadequate infiltration. Apart from that, okay, another indication would be if your sections break up during flotation. Okay, breaking up of sections during during flotation. Okay, during flotation. All right. So these are the indications of inadequate infiltration. Okay. Number one, you will have soft and shrunken tissue samples. Another, crumbling of your tissue blocks during sectioning. And lastly, we have breaking up of sections during flotation. So all of this indicates inadequate infiltration. Okay, so all of those indicate inadequate infiltration. All right. So another disadvantage of your paraffin processing is that it is not recommended for fats. Okay, this is not really due to your paraffin wax itself, but this is due to the fact that in paraffin processing, you need to make use of your alcohol for dehydration, and then you have to make use of your xylene for clearing. So remember that these two reagents, okay, so they are not recommended for fats or for lipids because they dissolve or they remove the fats or lipids which are supposed to be present in your tissue sample. Okay, ayan. So before we move on, I would just like to add some more. Add some more. Okay. Add some more predicament when it comes to prolonged immersion. Okay, ayan. So, remember, when we discussed, asan na ba yun? Sige, balikan natin. Okay, dito. So it says here, one of the factors that you have to consider in paraffin wax impregnation is when you are going to process or when you are processing larger and denser. Okay, yes, larger and denser tissue samples. So what is the requirement for larger and denser tissue samples? You have to perform impregnation longer. Okay, that's the problem here. Yes. Why is it a problem? Because a longer immersion of your tissue sample, this is already considered as prolonged immersion. Okay, prolonged immersion. So prolonged immersion is really needed if you are going to process larger and denser samples. Okay? So I repeat, if you are going to process larger and denser samples, prolonged immersion is unavoidable because that's the requirement for larger and denser samples. You have to perform infiltration longer. Tama? Yun ang requirement eh. Okay? Yes. So prolonged immersion, this is needed for tissues which are difficult to infiltrate. So what are examples of samples which are difficult to infiltrate? We have your bone samples, we have your teeth, teeth samples, okay, brain samples, and of course, eye samples. Okay, ayan. So if you are going to process these types of tissue samples, you need prolonged immersion. But again, we know that prolonged immersion causes shrinkage and hardening. And so what is our conclusion here? You cannot, or it is not advisable to use paraffin wax for bones, for teeth, for brain, and for eye samples. Okay? Because although the required immersion is longer, we cannot do that because it will cause shrinkage and hardening. Okay? So, yun ang pinaka-conclusion dito. You do not use paraffin for these samples. Alright? So, that's basically the conclusion in this one. Right? So, you do not use your paraffin for this. Okay? Yes. Otherwise, there will be excessive shrinkage and hardening, okay, of your tissue sample. Okay, so those are the advantages and disadvantages of your paraffin wax. Okay. So now let us move on to the methods. Sige, ano ko muna ito, i-stop ko muna. Okay. Yes, so for the next video, I will be discussing the methods of paraffin impregnation. Okay, so I'll end it here and I'll be sending another video. Okay, so 감사합니다. And I hope everybody's safe wherever you may be. Yes, so yeah, I hope everybody's safe. Okay, if you have questions, please do not hesitate to raise it in our group chat. Okay, so bye. Stay safe, guys. Bye.